My wife, 42 female, and I, 48 male, were married for 14 years. We never had any children, but that's not to say we didn't try. She was a manager at Kmart, and I worked in a shipping warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like we belonged with each other and our work crew. We had a routine in friends like family that I wouldn't have traded for the world. We were always honest, talkative, attentive, and considerate of each other. Our sense of humor was pretty dark. We liked watching and reading things online that would make other people squeamish. We also thought it was super funny when we ripped on each other and our friends thought we were seriously fighting. People from our apartment building would take turns cooking on the grill for the rest of us for a giant cookout. One day, the grill was moved to a different spot and caught a tree on fire. It spread to roof of the building and down all in a matter of minutes. Thankfully, everyone survived, but my wife and I passed out and had to be rescued by a volunteer firefighter before the fire trucks even arrived. We were taken to the hospital for asphyxiation from smoke inhalation. I was discharged 2 weeks before my wife, because she wasn't able to cover her mouth and nose like I did while I searched for her. It's impossible to see in smoke like that, so I started choking before I found her. While my wife recovered, she was conscious, but she needed special attention and respiratory treatment. I noticed one doctor that seemed to care very deeply about my wife. He was handsome and charming, which irritated me. My wife smiled at him, and they looked into each other's eyes very intently when they mostly him spoke. When I started staying by my wife's side, the doctor told me he was the one to receive her that day in the ER, and he'd been looking after her ever since. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted my wife to get the care she needed, but I didn't like this guy. He seemed to think too highly of himself and think he could take my wife if he wanted to. When he helped her stand up, he put his arm around her waist and held her close. She took her time moving when he was like that. I was struggling with my thoughts at this point. She didn't really need help walking, did she? My wife could barely speak, but she seemed smitten with the doctor and emotionally strained when she looked at me. She never said anything really alarming, but it was clear something had changed. We had a near-death experience, and that does change people, but I didn't want to believe my wife, and I wouldn't make it through this together unchanged. When it was time for her to be discharged, she hesitated to go home. She asked if she could stay in the hospital longer, which gave the doctor the opportunity to offer her follow-up visits at her home. I was very suspicious and didn't think it was all in my head anymore. I thought about objecting, but decided not to. I imagined how bad and weird it would look for me to deny my wife doctor visits. Even if he was pushing boundaries, I'd look like the bad guy. I couldn't believe he so easily agreed to make house visits. This was something a person with much less qualifications could have done, so I was positive it was because he at least wanted to visit my wife, if not more. The very first doctor visit was at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Of course, I was at work. I texted my wife at 9:10 to ask if he was there and how it was going. She didn't reply, so I started to wonder what was going on. I felt like a shell of a person walking around the warehouse. 2 hours later, I still heard nothing from her. Coworkers approached me, concerned for my well-being because I was pale and clammy. At 11:25, I was pulling into her driveway. I drove recklessly to get there as fast as I could after I got permission from my boss. I noticed his luxury vehicle and that the front door was locked, which was unusual for when we had a visitor. As I walked up the stairs, I heard them. Our dresser was pinning the bedroom door open against the wall because privacy was never a concern of ours. When I got there, I just dropped to my knees. I had no control over my body. The doctor leaped up and scrambled to get his pants on, flushed and angry. My wife covered herself with blankets, yelling helplessly as I rose to my feet and started throwing punches. It was the loudest I heard her since before the fire, and it made my blood run cold. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. Something made her change and let this man screw up her emotions. After I got in a few punches in my adrenalized state, the doctor must have realized what a dire and unprofessional situation he was in, because he stumbled down the stairs, got to his car, and drove off. In the bedroom, my wife apologized profusely and pleaded for me to forgive her, but I just screamed no and called her names that accurately described what she did. Of course, when I said cheater, she tried to say I stopped them, so it didn't count. She failed to understand that trying to seduce him with her eyes and gestures in the hospital and making out with him in the nude still counted as cheating. At first, I was worried he was going to press charges against me, and it would be my word against his, but nothing happened for months. I tried to get the doctor fired, but it didn't work because nothing was captured on camera and he hadn't told anyone he was making a house call. Plus, he had expensive lawyers that would pin all the blame on me for causing him injuries. My wife left pitiful voicemails on my phone, but when she realized I couldn't stand to look at her, she continued seeing the doctor, even before our divorce was final. I ended up kicking her out of the house, and a week later she posted that she was in a relationship with him. It made me sick. Life really seemed cruel, unfair, and without reason at this point. Thankfully, that's when it all started to turn around. She moved in with the doctor, who wasn't going to hand her money to help with the divorce aftermath. It didn't take long before AP realized what a mess she was and dumped her, kicking her to the curb when she had nothing else. She was so defeated, she didn't even try to get me to let her back in. Her sister let her move in, since she was exceptionally depressed after screwing up her whole life with me. My ex calls me occasionally, saying she misses me and would give anything in the world to have another chance at being my wife. She sort of blames the fire at our apartment for screwing up her head and making her think she felt things for the doctor when it was just survivor thankfulness. I didn't believe a word she said. For all I knew, she wouldn't be saying any of that to me if it weren't for AP leaving her. OP, I am so sorry your wife cheated on you with her doctor. It most likely was because her emotions of recovery influenced her to do something she hadn't done before. Emotions are not as big and powerful as what people think. With maturity, practice, and self-control, anyone can manage their emotions and do what's right. If denying the temptation bothers them that much, they should wait 72 hours after rejoining their spouse before deciding to talk to them about it. This conversation could end the relationship, since there's temptation, but at least there's a chance some sense could be talked into the tempted one and the two of you could grow stronger. You did the right thing by separating from her after stopping them. That's the only way to get a clear head and realize you're going to be okay without that person in your life. It takes strength and courage to part from people that have hurt us, but it is better to stand on your own for a while than with a traitor. Thanks for sharing with us. Now let's move on to our next story for the day. At the time of this story, my wife was 26 and I was 25. We were getting along fine, married for 3 years, together for 6. Ironically, one of the things that attracted me to her the most was her maturity. She usually thought through any big life decisions very carefully. Like what college she went to, haircuts she tried, and most importantly, when she wanted to have kids. Her parents raised her to think things through, but they were never very good with money. Her grandmother was the one to put her through college. So in her 3rd year of marriage, we had debt from my schooling and some of hers, and she still hadn't landed a job in her field. What she was working wasn't paying well at all, so a lot of the strain was on me. I could tell she felt bad, but I didn't know she was about to make a big decision without talking to me first. She decided to sell her car and met a potential buyer on a Monday while I was at work. He was very excited about it, but he couldn't drive it home until the weekend. So to reserve it, he paid her in full cash. She gave him a bill of sale, dated, signed, and notarized. However, she continued driving the car, and I didn't realize she'd sold it. She mentioned over dinner that she really loved her car, and then she broke down into tears. That's when she explained it all to me and added that she'd spent half of his cash on our bills and debt payments. I was pretty upset with her, and I told her she'd probably have to sell her car to him since we couldn't pay him back his money. Her face was deflated but accepted facts. She screwed up by selling a car she loved and needed, but she had to follow through now. I was at work on Saturday when my wife said the buyer was coming to get the car. She didn't respond to me while he was there, so that made me worry. I checked the live feed of our security camera out front. I only saw a guy, crew cut, standing in the driveway with the cars, but I rewound it a little and saw that the buyer had arrived with a crew cut to help drive the cars home. When my wife talked to him, it seemed like she was giving him bad news. He waved his arms around and rubbed his head like she was stressing him out. Just when it looked like he was threatening to sue her, she got him to quiet down and lean close to her so she could whisper something. She didn't know the camera didn't record audio. Instantly, his face softened and he smiled. He looked so surprised and happy with whatever she said. He glanced at the camera as my wife took him by the hand and led him around to the back of the house where we didn't have cameras. Crew cut just waited awkwardly in the driveway for several minutes. I was already driving home, furious. By the time I got there, the men and their car were gone. My wife's car was still there. She greeted me warmly as if everything was fine until she saw the anger in my eyes. I shoved past her to the backyard where I searched our patio furniture for any signs of foul play. Stuff looked moved around, but I couldn't find anything. I looked across the yard and noticed that our neighbor had a backyard camera that covered our yard too. I knocked on their door and after hearing my story, they invited me in and recovered the footage for me. They watched the video with me the first time of my wife having sex with the guy on the patio, just like I pictured. I spent walk towards my wife, standing helplessly worried in the backyard. She knew what I was doing and that our marriage could be over. As soon as I started playing her the video, she dropped to her knees. She didn't want to see it and tried saying she was sorry over and over again, as if that would make it all go away. I told her I hated her for what she did to me. I started my life with her, accepting her past and life as my responsibility, and I managed to keep her safe and happy, only for her to end it all by sleeping with someone to pay off a debt. It was low and desperate and she didn't need to do it. I told her to own up to her decision and follow through with selling the car. She went behind my back and lied more than once. My heart was broken. She told me she didn't see any other way out of it because she felt like she needed her car and his money. Then she kind of bragged by saying she offered him half his money back, but he said her skills paid him back in full. I packed my stuff while she cried and talked about how our bills were paid, so I should be happy and forget anything happened. I went to stay with my coworker. It was awkward and it made me feel lost. I had to find my packed toothbrush and toothpaste, and while digging through my bag of belongings, I found a pair of my wife's undies. It made me grieve for my loss. She fought me tooth and nail in court, even trying to claim that I was abusive and she was desperate to fall in love again. It was nothing like what you'd expect a woman to say to a judge. Since she couldn't prove anything and I had her cheating on film, she was ordered to leave the house. I sold it and started my life over in a different state, where I was offered twice my previous salary for doing the same amount of work. I know I lucked out and most infidelity victims aren't so lucky, but I wanted people to know that even when I felt that heart pang at my wife's clothing mixed with mine, I didn't run back to her. I deserved a chance at genuine love with someone else, and I actually found it in my new home state of Connecticut. OP, what your wife did was extremely low and it shows that she didn't think very highly of herself or the vows she took to remain loyal to you. It's hard to imagine why she didn't talk to you about selling her car in the first place or at least think it through. You did the right thing by checking the camera and going home to figure out what was happening, and as hard as it was to leave her there, feeling so remorseful, it was the right thing for you. After a spouse has committed adultery, it's a good idea to take some days away from them without contact. They've already cheated, so keeping an eye on them is only going to stress you out and make you more desperate to save the relationship instead of realizing you're okay without someone who's willing to do this to you. She made a very, very poor decision that the relationship couldn't recover from, all because she didn't talk to her spouse first about what she was thinking. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. I was married to my wife for 4 years, but due to her alcohol problem, our marriage was rocky. Before my wife and I were married, I knew she had a thing for alcohol, but I didn't think it would become a problem in the future. She was the type of woman who loved to drink and party. The first time we met each other was at a club. The moment I saw her, I liked her instantly, and I approached her in her group of friends. She and her friends had come to the club to celebrate a birthday that night, and that was how we talked and spent the rest of the evening at the club together. After meeting each other for the first time that night, we went home together because she asked if she could come home with me, and on the first night, we got intimate. My wife said she thought I was one of those men who wanted to tap her honeypot, and that would be the end, but for me, it was different. I liked her so much, and getting intimate with her intensified my feelings for her. In the following weeks, we met at least twice a week, and after 3 months of spending time together, we started dating. By this time, she was freshly out of college and did one of those small pay hourly jobs until she could get the kind of job she wanted. As I mentioned earlier, I knew my wife had a drinking problem from the first few weeks we met, but I didn't think it would get to the point of seeking help from rehab. After a year and some months of dating, my wife and I married and officially moved in together. Unfortunately, a year after we got married, she lost her parents and only sibling in a ghastly motor accident, and this was when things got worse. Losing her parents and only sibling in one day took its mental toll on her, and she resorted to drinking to help her deal with the pain. When her drinking got extreme, I thought it would only be for the mourning period, but it wasn't. After the burial, months passed, and my wife did not get over her family's demise. She became a shadow of herself, and I tried to comfort her. I understood that she was in a very dark place mentally, but I tried my best to support her in every area she needed support. Unfortunately, around that same time, she got pregnant but miscarried the baby, which added to her agony. She also stopped working, and caring for us fell on me. On the days she wasn't drinking, she would be aggressive and get mad over things that didn't require such anger. I once walked in on her making out with one of my neighbors, and I was furious. She was high on alcohol, and he seemed sober. I kicked the neighbor out of my house and reported him to his wife, but I couldn't do anything to my wife because I believed she wasn't in her right senses. Well, I was wrong, because a couple of days later, I saw her talking to the same neighbor, and when she saw me coming, she walked away from him immediately. Meanwhile, by this time, her drinking got worse. If I gave her money, she would spend all of it on alcohol, and it got to the point where she couldn't go a day without drinking. I got so frustrated, and I was tired too. I was tired of tolerating her, paying the bills alone, and still caring for her. It was already choking me, and I decided to get her help. When I had no other option, I told her I was taking her to rehab, but she was hesitant to go until after a series of persuasion. For the first 3 months she went to rehab, I noticed a significant improvement, and I was glad I was getting my wife back. As the concerned husband I was finally at peace that she had broken out of her bad habit and was finally getting her life together, but I was wrong. One day, I was at home enjoying some YouTube content on my phone, when my wife came home to tell me that she was getting married to the love of her life. When she said this, I didn't pay much attention to her, and I just laughed it off, but when she mentioned her rehab coach's name, my ears raised, and I asked her to repeat what she said. According to my wife, her rehab coach, Ryan, was the one for her, and she told me they were in love with each other. She also said that she loved Ryan because he treated her like a queen, talked to her nicely, and blah blah, and they would get married. I was shocked when I heard that and knew she was going nuts. The Ryan she was talking about was already a married man with 2 kids, so it didn't make any sense. I was also sure she did not come up with the whole marriage thing on her own, so I was forced to confront Ryan on her next meeting day. When I told him everything my wife had said and how they were planning to get married, Ryan said she was delusional, and somehow my wife heard all of his responses. She had been eavesdropping on our conversation, and the moment she heard him, she came out of her hiding place with her eyes filled with tears. She literally sobbed like a baby, and at the same time, she showed me a video of her and Ryan together in bed and in the bathroom naked. She had Ryan record the video of the last time they were together in a hotel, and he sent it to her. She even said Ryan promised to divorce his wife so they could get married. When she showed me the video, Ryan was so pissed, and he called her names for being dumb enough to believe that he would leave his wife to be with an unstable woman like her, and his words broke her heart. After losing her family, I had never seen my wife cry like that, and at that point, I understood that she loved Ryan as she claimed. She even planned to divorce me so she could be with Ryan, which was heartbreaking for me. I was so mad at Ryan for taking advantage of his client, my wife, and to give him a taste of his medicine. I pressed charges, using the video my wife showed me as evidence in court. Sharing this here is easy because the hurt and heartbreak I felt almost shattered me. Despite all the tough times my wife had given me, I still loved her, and I tried to get her help so that things could go back to normal, but she cheated on me in return, and even planned to divorce me to be with her rehab coach. Anyways, I still felt pity for her because she was utterly heartbroken after she found out Ryan was using her, and she nearly fell into depression. Out of pity, I had to submit her to a mental hospital for more watchful care, and after she was admitted, I divorced her. Even though it seemed like she was not in her right state of mind, she was in the right state of mind to think of divorcing me. Honestly, our relationship was a serious waste of my time, resources, and emotions, but I'll consider it as one of the lessons of life. I'll give a piece of free advice. Some women are not worth all the sacrifices most men make. Even if you give them the universe, they will still have an excuse to cheat. As for Ryan, I won the court case, and he got a jail term for taking advantage of his mentally unstable client, and the government shut his business down. I often miss my wife, but I cannot use her problem as an excuse for her to break our marital vows and cheat on me. OP, your wife might not have been in the right state of mind, but she was in her right mind when she planned to divorce you. It's painful to do your best for the woman you love, tolerate things you wouldn't have, put your life on hold for her, and in the end, she cheats on you with a flimsy excuse of her AP, treating her like a queen. You handled this well. Her AP is right where he needs to be, and so is your wife. I'll give you a piece of free advice too. Time heals everything, so take as much as you need to heal from this. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now let's get into our second story for today. Because I wouldn't want our identity to be disclosed, I will be using fake names for this post. My name is Jason, and I was in a relationship with my ex-girlfriend, Bella, for 5 years. Bella and I met each other at a unisex salon. To be precise, she worked at the unisex salon as a hairdresser, and the first day I met her was the first day she resumed work at that salon. She was friendly, and we got along well. I know I liked her from the onset, but I didn't think we'd become so close and fall in love. After visiting the hair salon several times, I asked for her number, and by this time, we were familiar with each other, so she couldn't say no. You know how the story goes, we went out together, got to know each other, and love happened. And when love happened, we ended up dating for 5 years. Personally, the main reason we didn't settle early was because I had been deeply hurt in the past by my ex-girlfriend, so I wanted to take things as slow as possible with Bella. And after 5 years, I decided it was time to tie the knot officially, and shortly after I asked her to marry me, we started the wedding preparations. 2 months before our wedding, Bella broke the news that she was pregnant, and although that wasn't part of our plans, I was happy, and I believed it was the universe's way of blessing us with an early wedding gift. Originally, Bella and I planned that we wouldn't have a child until 3 to 4 years after we were married, so by then, we would be all settled. In the past, she had an abortion twice, and I didn't want that for her again, so we decided we would keep the baby. Sincerely, it wasn't easy planning for a wedding and a child at once. It was even worse because Bella insisted we have the kind of wedding she had always dreamed of. She wanted us to use a venue, rent an expensive gown, and do a couple of other things that required a lot of money. It wasn't like I was the only one financing the wedding, she had been saving some money for it too, but I believed it was better to use most of our budget to lease a bigger apartment, since we were expecting a child, and also take care of other necessary things, but she refused. She claimed our marriage was a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and we had plenty more years to take care of our child and consider him before making any decision. So, after I thought about it, I saw her point, and we went ahead with the kind of wedding she wanted. We booked a venue and paid for the type of cake she wanted. After tasting a few, she paid for her gown, hairdo, and other things she had to take care of with her bridesmaids. Deep down, I was so excited I was getting married to the woman I loved, and I was even happier that she had not cheated on me once in our 5 years of dating. I believed she was a faithful partner, who would remain faithful until we grew old, but I was wrong. So wrong. I went far too deep into the future when my present was already a mess. I didn't know that while the wedding plans were going smoothly, and I was pumping my savings into making her dream wedding a reality, Bella was cheating on me with someone close to me. And I would never have found out if her jealous lover had not come out clean. A night before our wedding, I went home early that evening to drop a few things so I could join my friends for my bachelor's party, which was about to begin in 2 hours, and just as I reached the house, my best man called and asked if we could meet somewhere that he had something important to tell me. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the bar we were hanging out that night. On getting there, I noticed he looked unsettled, and soon as I sat down, he apologized in advance and told me he needed to get something off his chest. I was even a bit scared that he was about to cancel on me the night before my wedding, but what he told me was far worse than canceling on me. Straight to the face, my best man told me a little history of him and Bella and claimed he loved her so much and could not watch us get married. When he started saying everything, I thought he and my other friends were pranking me, and I kept looking around for someone recording us or any of my other friends, but immediately he showed me a sensual picture of him and my Bella together. My heart sank. He even showed me a text Bella had sent him before he called me, and it said something about him sneaking into her hotel room later at night so he could make her feel good for our wedding. Seeing that message cleared all my doubts, and I tried to hold in the hurt as a man, but I couldn't keep in the tears. That wasn't all. He told me he was responsible for the baby Bella was carrying, but they planned together for her to tell me it was mine, so I wouldn't think anything was off and break up with her. He also disclosed other things that made sense, and at that moment, I felt my world stand still. There were thousands of thoughts going through my head, and it was difficult for me to accept that the woman I loved and had very high expectations in our relationship was carrying my best man's child while I was doing all the necessary preparations thinking the child was mine. I was so mad that if it were possible to see my head lit on fire, my best man would have seen the smoke. When I had heard enough, I got up in anger, flung the chair I was sitting on, and walked out. I was trying to control my anger, but when he followed me and held my arm, I punched him in the nose by reflex, then drove off. As soon as I got into my car, I called the wedding venue to cancel the venue and other things I had made part payment for. I even managed to get home in that state without passing a limit, and immediately I got home. I cried like I had never cried before. While I was crying over Bella's wicked betrayal, she called to ask if I had cancelled the wedding venue because she got a call from them, and I told her I did. From my voice, it was obvious I had been crying, so when she asked if everything was fine, I didn't beat around the bush. I told her I knew everything, and our wedding was officially called off. It took her a couple of minutes to understand what I meant, and when she knew that I knew, she started crying and begging me over the phone. Throughout that night, she kept calling even when I told her I didn't want anything to do with her anymore. Also, I didn't sleep at home because I knew she would come over to try and beg me. To show how terrible she was, she even texted that we should get married and we would sort out everything after the wedding. She said this because she could not stand the shame of having her wedding called off the night before, especially after bragging to her friends. Our wedding was never held, and to date, I cannot forgive her for what she did to me. Everything I did for her and 5 years of my life went down the tube just like that. I wish cases like heartbreaks and infidelity had a place in court because I would have dragged her there, and I'd ensure she paid for all the years I wasted on her, the pain she caused me, and everything I invested in her. Since then, we haven't seen each other, and she didn't have the courage to face me after I called off the wedding. I moved into the house I rented for us as a surprise, and daily, I'm healing and moving forward. To my surprise, after everything turned out like that, my best man, who was my former close friend, tried to reach out to me to apologize for hurting me and breaking my trust, and he even tried to tell the story of how their affair started, but I wasn't interested in hearing his story. I told him we could no longer be friends, and he had no place in my life. Since then, we haven't made contact, and I'll never speak to him again. Call it childish, but I don't care. Anyways, Bella did not keep his child, she aborted the baby as payback to him for ruining her life, and they are not together anymore. I have learned my lesson and will never love deeply again. Most times, I wished I had channeled all the resources, investments, and sacrifices I made for our relationship into my life. It would have been way better than wasting time on a promiscuous woman, but like they say, when there is life, there is hope. OP, this was such an ultimate betrayal, and there's nothing childish about not speaking with a close friend who betrayed you like that. On the bright side of things, you just dodged a bullet and got relieved of the burden of raising another man's child. I know all the years, time, and emotions are gone, and nothing can bring them back, but you could consider this a blessing in disguise. Sadly, you ended up with a cheating woman, but there's nothing you would ever do to make things right or stop her from cheating. You have to keep healing. You owe that to yourself. Forget about your ex-girlfriend and your terrible friend. They don't deserve you. I wish you all the best with your recovery from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Here is my story. My wife and I have been married for 3 years. Before we got married, Cecilia and I had been dating for a year and a few months. I met her at a bachelorette party, and she was the younger cousin of one of the guys I met there. His name was Andrew, and he seemed to be a nice guy. I can't explain why, but something drew me to Cecilia. Although I didn't get to see her well that night until the next day at the wedding. She and her cousin were longtime friends with the groom, and they both flew in from another state to attend the wedding. After the wedding, I tried to talk to Cecilia, but she didn't seem to have my time, so I didn't disturb her anymore. Instead, I got her cousin's contact from the WhatsApp group we belonged to and asked him if he could share his cousin's number, and he did without asking for her permission first. Initially, talking to Cecilia seemed challenging, but I kept calling her, and in the end, she agreed to have a date with me. I am a nurse, so I had a 1-week leave, and I used the opportunity to go to the state she lived in and see her. From getting to know her, I discovered she worked with a marketing organization and had been working there for 3 years. We both realized we were single as we talked more, but Cecilia was not ready for a relationship. Her ex-boyfriend dumped her for an older, wealthier woman, and since then, she has been struggling with an abandonment mentality. However, I knew that no matter how she looked tough outside, she was just a delicate flower inside, and with the right amount of love, care, and attention, she would blossom and break through her barriers, so I did my best to shower her with all of that, even as friends. I even got her cousin to talk to her for me, so she could at least change her mind and be with me, and fortunately, she was the kind of younger cousin that listened to her older cousin, so she gave me the opportunity. We got closer, and I ensured I was there whenever she needed me because I loved her. The thing about me was that getting attracted to a particular girl did not happen to me every day, so when I saw Cecilia and liked her, I knew she was the one for me. So despite living in different states, I made sure I sent her flowers every week with a pack of her favorite chocolate until she said yes to me. When she said yes, I was literally the happiest man on earth, and as soon as I was due for my next leave, I hopped on the next flight to celebrate the beginning of our new phase of life together. I only had a few responsibilities, as the house I lived in was willed to me by my father before his demise, so I didn't pay rent and could save more money. Even without being with her, I would send Cecilia money to take herself to a fancy restaurant, go shopping, or even take her friends out on my behalf. I did everything possible to make her happy and not feel the distance between us until we married. After we married, her office transferred her to my state, and we began living together as a couple. A few months after Cecilia moved in with me, I began to see so many things I had not seen when we were in our long-distance relationship. She was messy in the kitchen, messy in the bathroom, and even messy in the bedroom. I complained about her habits every day until I eventually got tired, so I started cleaning up after her. She also picked offense to almost everything I did. For example, if I cleaned the house and she walked into a wet floor, she would yell and cuss at me, which continued with almost everything. Then she stopped cooking and didn't care whether I ate. Instead, she'd bring home-cooked food from any restaurant she visited and would microwave the following day as her breakfast. Before these changes, Cecilia loved cooking and wouldn't go a day without making fresh food. She hated warming food the next morning, and she always woke up very early in the morning to cook before I woke up. But when this happened, she became a different person, became more distant, and barely said a word to me, even if she was at home on some days. It got so bad that whenever I tried to start a conversation, she would cut me off with the excuse that she had work to do or was too tired to talk. After that, she didn't even let me touch her anymore, and a part of me began to suspect that she was seeing someone. But when I couldn't gather any evidence, I just let her be because I had heard people could change completely after some years of marriage. Her cold attitude toward me continued, and she even started sleeping on the couch because of my non-stop pestering for her to do her wifely duties. One day, I don't really remember what Cecilia did, and I yelled at her, but instead of sorting it out as adults like we used to, she picked a few cloves and told me she was going to her friend's house, and she threatened me to not call her friend if I didn't want to make things worse, so I didn't. 2 days after Cecilia left, I was at home thinking about how things had gotten bad between Cecilia and me when I got a call from a policeman. At first, I believed she parked wrongly or something, but I was told she had been involved in an accident, and the police officer shared the location. So, without wasting time, I rushed down there with my heart nearly falling into my stomach. The last thing I wanted was for something terrible to happen to my Cecilia. On getting to the accident scene, Cecilia was lying on a stretcher and sobbing. Her hand and arms were bandaged, and she sustained multiple injuries, but the guy that drove did not make it, so his body was already covered. Not to sound insensitive, but I was glad Cecilia was okay at that point. I know we had issues in the past, but I didn't want her dead or injured because I wanted us to work things out and go back to being the happy couple we were. I tried to speak to her, but she kept sobbing, and at the same time, the paramedic guy came to me and asked if I was her brother because he saw me standing by her bed. I told him I wasn't, but he insisted that he called Cecilia's brother and not me. It was funny because Cecilia was an only child, so when I asked him to show me the number he called, he showed me my number and explained that Cecilia saved my number as her brother on her iPhone. I was confused because that was the last thing I expected to hear. I also found out that the guy that died while driving Cecilia was her boyfriend, and they were on their way to another state for a vacation when the accident happened. Whatever was left of their clothes was in the trunk, and I stood there, unable to say a word. It was just too much to wrap my head around at that point. I cried and asked Cecilia if it was true, and she nodded. She was still in tears because of her lover's demise, and she could not even hide it. Even with our non-stop fights and distance, I could not even think of being with another woman apart from her, but she chose to hurt me like that. To think that I was even planning to go over to her friends that evening so we could settle everything and she could come back home, not knowing she was already on her way to a vacation with her lover. She was eventually taken to the hospital and stayed there for a few weeks. However, I only visited her once throughout her hospital stay because I still could not believe she had cheated on me after all those years, and it was really tough for me. The one time I visited her, her friend convinced me to go and see her, but I ended up standing outside her room door. I just could not take myself in there to talk with her. Finally, when she fully recovered, her friend updated me again, and I went to see her on the day she was discharged. What she didn't know was that when she was in the hospital, I contacted a lawyer and began to process our divorce papers, and on the day of her discharge, I gave them to her to sign. At least I had the decency to wait until she recovered. When she saw me, she began to cry, went down on her knees, and asked me to forgive her so we could return to being one happy family, but I told her it wasn't impossible and handed her the divorce papers. When her friend saw the divorce papers, she began to beg me too, but I told her to stay quiet and mind her business. On the other hand, Cecilia continued to cry, and she begged me to give her a second chance, but I dropped the papers and left, then I warned her to not return to my house. I already called her cousin to tell him what Cecilia had done, but he was too disappointed in her and wanted nothing to do with her. It turned out that the guy she was seeing was her colleague from work, and her company had the no relationship between colleagues policy. Knowing that she was married, they fired her to protect their reputation. So after she left the hospital, she had no job to return to, her friend kicked her out, and her cousin was far too embarrassed, so she had no one to support her. The last time I bumped into her friend, she told me Cecilia was now struggling financially, and she did crappy jobs just to make a living. It has been 2 years now, and I still can't shake off the feeling that every woman out there might hurt me again as Cecilia did. OP, you mentioned that your ex-wife saved your number as her brother on her iPhone, which is absolutely terrible. This means she had been playing you for a very long time. I'm not a fan of long-distance relationships because of how pretentious both parties can be. Honestly, I don't think your wife loved you, she was just using you. You should have dug deeper when you noticed the changes, and you should know better that people don't just wake up and change. She should have just ended things with you instead of cheating on you with her colleague. It's good that you found out the truth the hard way, and you didn't allow her or her friend to convince you to change your mind. She didn't deserve a second chance, and I'm glad you weren't weak in your decision-making. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now, let's get into the second story for today. My wife and I had been married for several years before I caught her red-handed cheating on me. Evelyn and I were actually fellowship members, and she was gorgeous. Most times I would go to church on Sunday just to see her. However, we were not close friends until I discovered my aunt moved into her neighborhood. 3 houses after my aunt's house, to be precise. As of that time, we were just teenagers, and we weren't close friends like I said earlier because I wasn't exactly the kind of guy she would love to associate with. About 4 years later, my aunt died from cancer, and I stopped visiting the neighborhood, and everyone moved on with their lives. But I changed. Something happened to me that I can't share here, and it pushed me to take a different direction in life. I became more serious about my dreams, education, career, and spiritual life. Before this time, I was just a wild young man doing things my peer group did without thinking of the consequences of the future. Luckily, I went to college, graduated, and found a job. Then one day, I bumped into Evelyn on my way back from work. It was a pleasant surprise, and we exchanged contacts. When we were free some days later, we hung out to talk about what had happened in our lives in the past years, and mainly what had happened with me. After our first meeting, we had other hangouts together, and slowly the love I had for her rekindled. And when I felt the time was right, I asked her out, and she said yes. We dated for 2 years, and Evelyn and I never got intimate in the whole 2 years. I was a changed guy, and didn't want her to think I was with her because of her body. Aside from that, my spirituality with God grew, and I didn't want to jeopardize that too, so Evelyn and I promised to be celibate until marriage. Eventually, we got married and got intimate on the first night of our wedding. But somehow, I felt like Evelyn was not enjoying my husband's duties, no matter how much I did. She did not say a word to boost my ego or anything. She just stayed there like she was waiting for me to get over and done with, which continued for almost 3 years. We wanted to have kids early because I didn't want to have a 15-year-old son at 50, but no matter how much we tried, she couldn't conceive, which worried us. Meanwhile, there was this uncle of Evelyn whom she was so fond of, her mother's younger brother. I had seen her around him several times as a teenager, so I believed he was her favorite uncle. This uncle of hers, Jesse, used to visit us a lot after we got married, and I didn't have an issue with that because both of our families were welcome to the house. They didn't need permission before coming because Evelyn was always at home. Evelyn's father was not in her life, and I had the first-hand experience of growing up without a father or an uncle I could look up to, so I didn't want to ruin their moments. So, most times, I would go shopping for Jesse to show him that I appreciated how he looked after my wife and raised her to be the God-fearing woman she was, or so I thought. Also, on some nights, Jesse was allowed to sleep over at our place if he stayed so late, and I never said no because I began to see him as my father. All along, I never noticed anything unusual between the both of them. I knew they were close, and almost every weekend Evelyn would invite her uncle, Jesse, to come over. The only thing I complained about was how she told him about everything that was happening in our lives. There was even a time when Evelyn and I had a terrible fight, and she called Jesse to come and pick her up and ended up spending the night there. After that was settled, we had no issue that would require her to leave the house anymore. Also, if I felt like Jesse was visiting too much, and I barely had time to spend with Evelyn, I would suggest taking her somewhere, but she would end up inviting Jesse alone, so I stopped doing that. Throughout these 2 years, nothing suspicious happened until one fateful Friday. That Friday, I was about to return from work when I found out that my 15-year-old car had broken down, and I had to call my usual car company to take it and fix it, so I took a taxi home. Our 3rd anniversary was around the corner, and I had already made plans to take Evelyn on vacation. It was meant to be our first, but I decided I could get her flowers in advance, so to do that, I asked the taxi driver to drop me at a flower shop a street away from where we lived, and I got the flowers and walked back home. As I climbed my front porch, I heard strange sounds coming from my living room, and I was shocked. At first, I believed Evelyn was watching adult movies, but it didn't sit well with me because it was unlike her, and the sounds I heard sounded more natural. Finally, when I could not control my thoughts anymore, I pushed the door with force, and when it opened, my eyes saw the unbelievable. I didn't even know when the flowers fell out of my hands. When they saw me, they jumped up immediately and scrambled for their clothes. I screamed so loud, and tears dropped uncontrollably from my eyes. That was the worst kind of heartbreak and betrayal I had ever gotten. I would never believe that Jesse and Evelyn could be a thing, and at that point, their closeness began to make sense to me. I understood why he was always around her and at my house, and why she couldn't go a single day without calling him. It wasn't because he was like a father figure to her, but because they were cheating on me. Evelyn began to cry, and started to beg me, but I was so disgusted, and I didn't even want to look her in the eye. Evelyn eventually left with her uncle, and they were so embarrassed at how the neighbors gathered to look at them. After she left, she tried to call me multiple times, but I blocked her, and she didn't return to the house because of the embarrassment. Later, I discovered that she had been having an affair with Jesse since she was young, even while we promised to ourselves for each other. Also, the whole time Jesse visited my home like it was his, they were cheating on me, and I even bought him gifts to appreciate him, and I treated him with so much love. Around the same time I resigned from my job, I contacted a lawyer who helped process the divorce papers. In the end, we divorced and went our separate ways. The wound I got from that heartbreak has not healed since then. Today would have been our 4th anniversary, and I think it's better to share this here to lessen the burden I've carried for so long. I hate her so much for doing this to me. It would have been way better if she didn't come into my life to hurt me like this, and I hope she gets her karma. As for her family, I don't know what happened when her family found out, and I don't care, but I hope everyone sees her as a monster. Opie, your ex-wife, was secretly having an affair with her uncle for almost 3 years under your roof, and you didn't suspect a thing. You must have really trusted her. She should not have led you on if she knew she wasn't ready to stop her dirty acts. I guess this is why they say, don't judge a book by its cover, because you used her external appearance as a metric to measure her as wife material. I'm glad you kicked her out of your house, and you made the right decision by ending things with her. Thank you for sharing with us. I hope you were able to heal from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. My ex and I were lovers from our university days. The first time we met was during our second lecture as freshmen, and we sat beside each other. We were both young teenagers with heads full of dreams, and I always wanted a partner I could share my dreams and life with. I know this might sound childish, but what really attracted me to my ex-wife was her handwriting. At first glance, they looked like they were well crafted by an artist, and I was stunned to see someone my age with such perfect handwriting. She, on the other hand, was an absolute beauty. I didn't just fall in love with her handwriting that day. I fell in love with her ocean blue eyes, blonde hair tumbling over her shoulders, and a smile that could light up a small city. Typically, I wasn't the kind of guy who made friends quickly. I was more of the reserved guy who waited for friends to come to me, and we built a relationship from there. But I had to make an exception with her. We started talking in the lecture hall that day, and with time, we became seat buddies, and we were always sitting next to each other. It was great to make a new friend in college, and we got along very well. Since we were both freshmen and didn't know our colleagues or have any friends, we decided to stick together until we became inseparable. My ex-wife and I became best friends, and we didn't start dating until our 3rd year. The reason I delayed in asking her out was that we were so close, and I was afraid she would turn me down if I did, but I didn't know I was making a mistake because other guys were beginning to ask her out, and she would tell me about them. At that point, I could not hold it in anymore, and I figured it was better to be turned down than to shy away, so I asked her out, and she said yes. As soon as she said yes, I asked her to move in with me, and she did, and our love story officially began. I loved her more than I loved myself. Even as a student who was only earning little from my part-time job, I did everything to make her happy. We went to parties and concerts, and we had fun together. Almost all of our colleagues knew we were dating, and they always found us together. Every time we stepped out together, people could easily tell we were together because of how I looked after her, and some would even ask how long we had been dating because they loved what they saw. Aside from being fun and pleasure partners, we were reading partners and helped each other until we graduated from the university. Our parents knew we were together and respected our decision to live with each other. After we graduated from the university, I was lucky to get a good-paying job, but my ex-wife wasn't. We both applied to the same places, but for some reason, she kept getting rejection emails, which took its toll on her. I even helped her write and edit her resume, but she wouldn't get hired if she got to the interview level. We thought it was normal for that to happen, and it would only be for a couple of months, so we went ahead and got married. The wedding was beautiful, but it was small, and we had support from friends and family. After we got married, we moved out of the studio apartment we both lived in and rented a bigger 2-room apartment. I was the one who single-handedly paid rent and took care of all the bills and even groceries. I understood that she wasn't working then and didn't want to do one of those hourly menial jobs, so she wouldn't get comfortable with it, and I understood that. And since we were not financially stable, we agreed to only have kids once we both had jobs that could sustain us and a child. Even with my new job, we still spent quality time with each other, since the job allowed me to work 2 weeks on site and 2 weeks remotely. Despite my responsibility at home, I didn't stop making her feel special. On my way back from work, I'd still stop to get her flowers, shop for her, buy her a piece of new jewelry or bag, or even get her chocolates. I did all of that because I didn't want her to feel the impact of not having a job yet, and I also wanted her to know that I was happy doing all of the things I did, even though it meant I'd have nothing left to save at the end of the month. 1 year passed, and my ex-wife still did not get the kind of job she wanted, but she kept applying to different organizations. It was in the 11th month that she began to do the small menial jobs that didn't pay well, and she reluctantly agreed to do that after I had talked to her over and over. Even with her 1 month of working, I didn't let her contribute a penny to house bills. I preferred that she kept the money for herself, so she could get whatever she wanted and be happy. We were always happy and doing things together at home. We cooked, had our bath, and even went for evening walks and roadside ice cream hunting together. Our bond grew stronger, but one day, I discovered something that broke my heart. That day, I was at home working, and she was doing the day shift at a fancy restaurant she worked for when she called me, and asked me to help her find her physical resume so she could use it to apply for a job opening as soon as she returned home. I confirmed the job opening to be accurate, and knowing how much our lives would change if she got a job at that organization, I left what I was doing and went to help her find her resume. She had instructed me that I would find it in the first document holder in a box she kept her documents in, but after going through all the pages in that document folder, I couldn't find her resume, and because of that, I had to take out all of the document holders and go through them one after the other. Immediately, I carried the third document holder to search for her resume. Small-sized notes and cards fell out of it, and I was curious to find out what they were. I felt my chest tighten and my lower tummy churn by merely reading them. The small-sized notes and cards were exchanged between my ex-wife and one of our professors, who she was really fond of back in the university. It turned out they had been having an affair for years, and no one knew about it, and I didn't even suspect anything between them. I was very disappointed, and I really wanted it to be that I was having a bad dream. I found it difficult to believe that my ex-wife was also doing the professor while we were together, and it made sense because I kept wondering why we were always treating infections when she was my only partner. Before I packed her document holders back into the box, I took some of the notes and cards and told her I couldn't find her resume. I knew she would be back home soon, so I asked her if I could edit and print a new resume for her before she returned home, and she agreed. She sent me her laptop password shortly after our call, and I used the opportunity to go through her social media accounts since she linked them to her laptop. I found the chats between her and our professor on Instagram, and I was even more heartbroken. I was already boiling in anger, so I plotted my own revenge. I knew she trusted me and wouldn't bother going through the resume, so I edited it so she could fail her job interview. Then I took pictures of her chat with our former professor on my phone and forwarded both pictures of their chats and the notes to her university. When she got home that evening, I didn't tell her anything. I just acted like I had fallen sick so I could be alone. After she submitted her resume and got an email that she was not fit for the job, I told her what I had done, and she thought I was joking. It was until I mentioned her affair with the professor that she knew I wasn't kidding. She fell on her knees and started to beg me, but she betrayed me, and I could not forgive her. She tried to explain that she did it for our grades, but what I read did not sound like that, so there was no way I was buying that. I kicked her out of the house that evening and notified her parents about what she had done. I already contacted a lawyer to process our divorce papers, and we divorced when the papers were ready. As for our professor, he knew such a relationship was prohibited in our university, but he broke the rule. The university fired him, so he and my ex-wife lost in the end. She tried to come back and beg me. She even sent me multiple messages on Facebook and Instagram, but I blocked her afterward and warned her not to show up at my apartment again or else she would regret it, and she never showed up again. Sadly, we were only married for 1 year, but I'm glad I found out that early because finding out later would have hurt me more. I am fine now and focusing more on my career and personal development. I was deeply hurt and betrayed. It would take a while before I entered another relationship. OP, you did the right thing by kicking her out of your house and divorcing her. Even if she claims she had an affair with your professor to help your whole class get good grades, it's still not a justification for her to cheat on you like that. It only means that she would do the same thing if she had another opportunity to have an affair with someone else to get whatever she wanted. What she did is called cheating, and it's not acceptable. To even think they were still communicating with each other after you both got married. I'm glad you didn't let her manipulate you with her lies and tears. It's a sign that you're not a weak man, and I am very proud of you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now let's move on to the second story of the day. My wife and I were married for 4 years. Our relationship years in marriage were just perfect. Each time I remember how my wife broke my trust, it still hurts me because I remember how much we went through and overcame to get to the level we were, yet she forgot about everything and destroyed our happy home and lives. The first time I met my wife, the stars aligned in the right order for me that day, and something pushed me to go grocery shopping in the middle of the weekday off from work, unlike my usual weekend shopping. While I was in the store taking the things I needed, I noticed an average height, light-skinned girl walk down the row I was shopping on, and she smiled at me. I returned the smile out of shyness, but I focused more on what I needed and left her in that row. A few minutes later, I was done shopping, but before I took the things to the cashier to pay for them, I noticed she was already driving out, and I didn't think much about her. About 2 minutes' drive from the store, I saw her standing on the road with the hood of her car open, and I didn't need a psychic to tell me that she was having car issues. Out of kindness, I pulled over and asked if I could help. Thankfully, she was having a minor battery issue, and it was definitely something I could help with. When we were done fixing her car, we talked a bit, and she willingly gave me her number without me asking, and we said goodbyes. 1 week passed, and I had forgotten about her and her number. It wasn't until the day I was looking for an old friend's contact that I saw her name saved. I remembered her instantly and felt terrible for not calling her after days. Without wasting time, I called her and introduced myself, then we fixed a date. She was a bit uptight at first, but after much persuasion and my begging her to let me make things right, she agreed to our date. Our first date wasn't at a fancy restaurant or an eatery like the regular dates. She insisted that if we were meeting, it would have to be at a popular park. We both knew, and I agreed. Later that evening, we met and talked about ourselves, and we ended up having more evening picnics and park dates after that. When we met, we were both freshly out of college and lived at our parents' house. I was fortunate to get retained at an organization I interned at, and the pay was not really good, but it was okay to keep things going until I got a good job. My wife, on the other hand, worked 3 jobs simultaneously because her mom was sick, and she needed all the money she could get to buy medication and take care of things at the house. Her father worked too, but he was inconsistent and spent all his money on alcohol. He didn't contribute to the house, so the responsibility fell on my wife and her younger brother. Eventually, we got married because I didn't think I could live without her. We loved each other so much, and we were always together. Even when she was mourning, I was there for her emotionally, physically, and otherwise. I supported her as usual, and we continued our lives together after her mom passed. I always treated her like my special woman, and I gifted her whenever I could afford to. In fact, 2 months after her mother's burial, I took her on a 1-week vacation so she could take her mind off everything, and it worked. Luckily for us, shortly after we got married, she got employed at one of her dream organizations, and her job was soft. Her pay was great, 3 times better than what I earned, and I was so happy for her. I felt like God was rewarding her for all her hard work when her mother was alive. But sadly, the first 1.5 years of her doing her new job didn't come with changes for us. I was still the one taking care of all the bills at home, and that was because she had so much debts to settle. After she settled most of the debts she racked up in the past years, we began to see changes. All that while, she neither bought herself clothes nor anything new. She mainly wore clothes from thrift stores and fairly used shoes and bags. When she got that month's salary, the first thing she did was get herself a new phone and some clothes. She also settled all her credit card debts, which was such a relief for us. Since I was more of a tech person, the first thing she did when she came home that day was to give me her new phone to help set it up, and I was glad to do that. She needed me to transfer all of her photos and messages from her old phone to her new phone, and that was how I stumbled on her iCloud account. Somehow, one of the names she saved on her phone piqued my interest. It was the name she used to call me when we started dating, but as we grew older together, she stopped calling me that. The name had sent her message through an app one didn't even know about, and they had been communicating frequently, even more than we did. I read some of their messages, and I was forced to read them all to satisfy my curiosity. To my greatest shock, I discovered that my wife was having an affair with one of her coworkers, and they had been dating for the past 8 months. I also found that the evenings she told me she was working overtime at the office were clearly a lie. They had been going on fancy dates, and even took pictures of themselves when they were at it. The most shocking part was when I found out that my wife and her lover were planning for her to divorce me, so she could move in with him while her lover's wife and kids could return to his parents' house. I was very disappointed and betrayed, and I could not believe she had been playing me the whole while, even though she knew I genuinely loved her. The funny thing was, I was planning to get her an expensive gift that week to appreciate and encourage her to work harder, but she ruined everything. I was so mad that I forwarded the to my phone as evidence, then I got her HR's email address, and anonymously sent everything to them. I knew very well that their company was against coworkers dating, and I knew they would get fired. Well, it worked. She came home the next day in tears, claiming that her company decided to cut down on staff, and she was fired. To her surprise, instead of consoling her like she expected, I laughed and told her I was responsible for everything, but she didn't understand me. When I showed her their conversation from my phone, she started crying again and asked me to forgive her. She said that she did it because I was too dull and nice. She also said it was because I did everything she wanted without complaint, and she wanted something different and someone who would give her a tough time. I was devastated, angry, and in tears. I kicked her out of my house, and shortly after that, we divorced. I didn't want anything to do with her or her family anymore, and if she didn't leave when I asked her to, maybe I would have hit her, and it would put me in a more terrible state. Before she left, I reminded her that her late mother would be so disappointed in her, and hearing that made her cry even more. I also blocked her on all the social media platforms we shared, and I warned her brother to not come close to my house, or he'd be arrested. Finally, after staying at that house for 4 months, I moved to a different location because I could not handle people constantly asking me of her. I also heard she went to confront her lover, thinking the wife would divorce him so she could move in with him, but he embarrassed her and his wife even hit her. Most times, I think she played me from the beginning, but I hate to admit that I was used to it. I wasted a greater part of my life and finances for nothing, and I hope she is miserable wherever she is. I am slowly moving on, but I know it will take a while, and I am in no rush. When people cheat, there are usually signs, but you were blinded by love. You did what you had to do because she didn't deserve you. She had a good man, but she didn't appreciate you or all of your efforts, and went ahead and cheated on you. She even lied about why she was fired from work, and I can't help but think about the other times she lied to you. I hope she is miserable, and hope you will be able to heal from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Everything between me and my wife, 31 female, seemed perfect on the outside. We have been together since high school. It was like something out of a romantic comedy. She was the nerdy girl who spent her lunch periods in the library, and I was the football player. Even though historically we would have never spent time together, she and I ended up falling for each other. Right after college, we ended up getting married so we could move forward and start our lives together. We bought our first house very young, we both scored very nice jobs, and we started planning to have kids. Fast forward 3 years and we have 1 son and another baby on the way. In high school, my wife had a friend who had always rubbed me the wrong way. It was so obvious that he had a thing for her, but she constantly insisted that he was just nice. I tried to explain to her that it made me uncomfortable when she spent a lot of time with him because it was clear to me that he liked her and didn't care that she and I were happily married. Whenever I would bring it up, it would always cause an argument, so eventually I gave up. They talked on the phone all the time, they would always be texting each other and sending memes, and they had a ton of little inside jokes that I always felt like I was on the outside of. He didn't attend the same college as us, but they reconnected after graduation when we all moved back to our hometown. As it turned out, he was studying in the same field as her, so they were able to land a job at the same company. My wife didn't have a ton of friends in high school, so when she made a lot of friends at her new job, she was very excited. She was buddy-buddy with a lot of the girls in the office, and they would go to brunches, theater, and they would even have sleepovers on occasion. I was really happy for her because I knew she was looking for a group like that for so long, and part of me thought she would be spending less time with her male best friend. Last winter, I started to notice the difference in how she interacted with him. She didn't talk to him as often, or at least I didn't see them talking as much. He stopped coming over to the house, and I only saw him on occasion when I would visit the office. I was hopeful that she had outgrown him and they were finally parting ways. One day my wife came to me and told me that a bunch of the girls from the office were planning a girls' trip for the weekend. She told me it would be harmless fun, just drinking some wine and talking while they relaxed with their face masks. She left Friday evening and I stayed at home with the kids. I genuinely hadn't thought anything was wrong. Saturday evening rolls around and I'm in bed searching through Netflix looking for something to watch when my phone rings. It was a phone call for her male best friend. Right away, I thought it was strange because he and I had never really been close, so him calling me was bizarre. I answered the phone and waited for him to say something, but he never did. I was about to hang up the phone when I heard a part of the conversation they were having. He was telling my wife how much he loved her. My wife was on the other line as well. Wherever she had gone for the weekend, he had gone as well. I absolutely could not put down the phone while I listened. She told him that she regretted what they had done a few weeks ago and that last night was a mistake. She had gone there to have a conversation with him and end everything. It was then that I realized there never was a girls' trip. They continued their conversation until I could hear them kissing on the other line, then I finally hung up. I couldn't believe what I just heard. I felt sick to my stomach and I wanted to scream, but I couldn't do anything to upset my children. At first I thought it was such an odd time to be but dialed by him. The more I thought about it, people only but dialed their recent contacts, so it didn't make sense for him to have accidentally called me. He did it on purpose. He called me while he had that conversation, hoping I would overhear it. About an hour passed, then I got the text messages. They were all from him. They were screenshots of conversations, pictures they had sent each other, and even a clip from a video that he had taken at the lake house they were staying in. I was absolutely shocked. It was the last thing I wanted to see, but I was glad he sent it. I didn't say anything back. He probably thought that he had won this imaginary fight that he and I have been having for the past 10 years, but I would find a way to make them both pay. I sat on the information, stewing in all of the ideas that I had to get revenge on them both. I knew that I wanted to get them fired, but that didn't seem like punishment enough. My wife came back Sunday night and couldn't even meet my eyes. She felt guilty for what she did, as she should have. By the end of the week, she would only feel worse. I pretended like nothing happened, not wanting to stir the pot and upset our children any more than they would be after everything. Their well-being was my priority, which apparently she didn't care too much about. On Wednesday, I was able to get a meeting with her boss. Her company had a strict no dating within the workplace rule, so I knew at the very least they would both be reprimanded for that. The real kicker in all of it was that one of the pictures my wife's friend sent me was of them together in the break room. I had attended many company Christmas parties in the past, so I recognized it well. Her boss was horrified when she saw the images of them together. No doubt she was thinking about how she drank her coffee at the table they screwed on. Now I knew my wife and I knew her well. I was certain she had no clue her friend sent me any of the information that he did. When she found out what he did, she would want nothing to do with him. His little power play cost him any chance he had of being with her after our separation. As soon as I stepped out of the office, I watched her boss storm over to her friend and practically drag him into the office. I went right over to my wife's desk and I dropped an envelope with all of the printed documents I had been sent alongside divorce papers. She had one of those open offices that didn't like to use cubicles or box their workers, and so everybody got a good view when I served her the papers. I told her that I wanted a divorce, then, with my voice raised higher than it normally would be, I told her I knew everything about her affair with her friend. I watched the women around her raise their eyebrows and hurriedly look away as if they couldn't hear anything. My wife's face was as red as a tomato, she was so embarrassed. I walked out of the office knowing that she was likely about to get fired for what happened in the break room. I took the kids to my brother's house and we stayed with him for a few weeks while I looked for another apartment. She and I are officially divorced, but we're still going through custody hearings for the children. We have agreed on joint custody, but the biggest issue is figuring out the holiday schedule. She and her friend were both fired, and from what I understand, she has completely cut him off. She moved back in with her mom and I ended up selling the house that I got to keep. OP, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Her friend's intentions were always clear to you from the start, and it's such a shame that she wouldn't listen to you. Setting up clear boundaries between the two of them could have prevented the fallout of your marriage, but it seems like she might have had lingering feelings for him too. The worst part of all of this is that she didn't even have the courage to tell you about the affair. He only called to hurt you. You're right that it does seem like some sick power play on his end. I really hope you were able to move on from this and find someone else more worth the time and effort. Now let's move on to our next story. I, 26 male, met my ex 25 female in college, but we didn't date right away. We ended up running into each other after graduation and hooking up. She and I had been running in the same circles, but we weren't close by any means in college. After running into her, I did admit that I had a bit of a crush on her at some point, and she told me that she felt the same way. Things were good with us for a while. We had been together for 3 years when I popped the question and asked her to be my wife. She was beyond excited and told me that she wanted nothing more than to be my wife. We hadn't been living together at the time. She was on a lease with a roommate and she didn't want to abandon her. After our engagement, she slowly started moving things over so she could officially live with me when her lease was up. She spent most of her nights at my apartment anyway, so it made sense. Every now and then she would crash at her apartment if she was super exhausted from work or if she had to get up extra early. She told me she did that just so she wouldn't disturb me when she got up and did her whole makeup routine to get ready. As much as I wished she was at my apartment, I didn't really mind that much since she was only a few blocks away. What I didn't know at the time was that she was using her old room as a place to film for her OnlyFans. I didn't even know she had an OnlyFans. She didn't have the best job when I met her. She was making about $16 an hour and she was being worked to the bone. She would constantly be complaining about terrible coworkers, the things she had to do, and how exhausted she was at the end of every day. It took me a little while to notice, but she stopped complaining about all of that. Not only was she not telling me about her work day, she suddenly had all of this money to throw into our wedding. She wanted designer dresses, the nicest venue, premium organic food, you name it. I told her I had no idea how we were going to afford her dream wedding, but she just kept telling me that we would figure it out. I found out about her account by complete coincidence. Realistically, there was probably some algorithm that brought me to this. My girlfriend looked like my dream girl, so most of the pictures I would look at online were of women who looked very similar. I was scrolling through some Twitter comments and I saw one of those ads for an OnlyFans account nested within them. It wasn't from her account, it was from somebody's account that just listed a bunch of different models to get views. I had to do a double take when I scrolled past it to make sure it really was her. I was 100% certain that the woman in the video I saw was my fiancé. Now there's no shame in having these accounts and making money from them. Honestly, if they can hustle doing that, then good for them, but I wished I would have known that my girlfriend had one herself. I'm a pretty traditional guy and I don't love the idea of other men online seeing my girlfriend completely naked doing God only knows what. Of course I had to click on the account to see what was happening. I paid $14 for a month's subscription so I could see for myself what she was posting. For the most part it was all stuff she was doing by herself. I recognized right away that it was in her old apartment, so it finally made sense why she was so hesitant to leave. I didn't like that she was doing this, and at the very least I wished she'd told me. I thought maybe we could have a conversation about it and I could convince her to delete it. It wasn't worth throwing away our future. At least I thought that until I saw a collaboration she did with another creator. They were in her room and there was a full video of her having sex with some random man. The more I scrolled, the more content of the two of them that I found. It looked like they had filmed 10 videos together and had taken countless photos. All of her subscribers loved it and were asking for more of them together. I scrolled back further and found another collaboration with a woman that I recognized as her roommate. I was shocked by all of it, but I couldn't look away. I didn't understand why she would open an account without speaking to me about it, and how could she so casually cheat on me on the account. I couldn't stay at home and see her, so I crashed at my buddy's place and talked to him about it. He helped talk me down and figure out what I should do. We both came up with the idea of ruining her account. I still had my subscription, so we commented on a post pretending to be another hot girl and invited a bunch of her subscribers to watch an Instagram live of us. Of course, a bunch of them jumped at the opportunity. When I had enough people, I explained what happened, telling all of those men that she had cheated on me and kept the entire account a secret. A lot of them didn't like that because she was pretending to be this nice sweetheart when she spoke to them. They felt like she was lying to them, so they canceled their subscriptions. My fiancé found out and came to confront me at my friend's house when she saw that I wasn't home. We had a huge argument and she tried to explain to me that she was doing it for us so we could have a nice wedding. I just told her that the wedding was off and explained that she needed to get her things out of my apartment. She tried to convince me not to leave her, but I had no interest in being with her after what I'd seen. We ended up officially breaking up and calling off the wedding. She's continued using her OnlyFans. Apparently, the guy she had collaborated with had a girlfriend who didn't know about the videos they made. She dumped him and posted a video explaining what happened, and his account tanked too. I was glad that my video could help her see the truth. OP, I can't believe you had to go through that. Creating an account on something like that is something you should disclose to your partner. From the sound of it, you would have definitely done whatever you could to give your fiancé her dream wedding. It's such a shame she would go behind your back like that. Her hiding the account was bad enough without secretly sleeping with another man for content. They had agreed to film together several times. That goes far beyond a one-time collaboration. The two of them must have had some other kind of connection. I'm glad you were able to break away from her, and I'm glad your story was able to help another person in a similar situation. I wish you well, and I hope you can recover from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.